Okay, before we kick off, happy birthday.
Thank you.
It's your birthday today as we're recording this.
Yes.
I won't tell everybody how old you are.
We could say I'm 45.
There
I
you
don't
go.
know. It's honestly that five made me sound so much older when I was thinking about it this weekend than the 44.
You think so?
I don't know why. I mean, not that I'm like dwelling on it, but it's just
now you're on the
45
business.
sounds like incredibly older than 44. Like, and I don't know.
Well, yeah, because you're on the business end of your 40s. You're on the back half.
Yeah, maybe that's it. I don't know.
And tomorrow you're closer to 50 than you are to 40. Right?
Yep.
What's planned?
No plans. It's like nothing stops when you have kids. And so kids have kids activities, and you're not gonna cancel lessons and all the other stuff that kind of comes along just because it's your birthday. So we'll do some takeout. My wife will bring some food home just for dinner.
What's your birthday meal? Are you choosing it?
I did. I had a harder time choosing. I had to sit there and Yelp, and then I think I defaulted to Heirloom just because it's good for it's easy for takeout.
Choice.
My parents usually want to go out for dinner as well, and so I kind of got tasked with like choosing something for tonight and then choosing something for Friday night with my parents and my sister. And it became a little bit more harder. I was like, where do I really want to go? Where do we go that's like good and that I want to? And my wife was like Annex, because I do love Annex, but the bigger problem with Annex is you can't hear anyone, especially a group of like 8 people. You can't hear people. No. So yeah, I'll figure something out for Friday as well. But
so you don't have a spot. You don't have your spot.
No. So Heirloom would be tonight.
All right. Well, good. Well, happy birthday. Enjoy both of your birthday dinners. All right. Question of the week. Here we go. What was your first job?
My first job, I worked junior year in high school at a pharmacy, doing like miscellaneous tasks in the back room. We had some family friends. I don't even know. I wasn't really looking for a job. I don't even know why I ended up at the job, to be honest with you, because I wasn't like looking for a job. Like I needed money. I think it just came up, and default was to say yes as opposed to no. Yeah. I ended up getting in a really, really bad car accident with some friends junior year, and it kind of required me to walk away from the job because I couldn't drive. Like at that point, it was harder for me to drive. My hand was like in a cast, so I couldn't lift the boxes. So my job was really limited, and so it ended because of that car accident. I just never came back to it afterwards.
As a storeroom clerk, you got to be able to lift things and move things.
Yeah. And you? Where was
I was a bus boy. I was a bus boy at Marie Callender's.
Oh man, maybe I didn't know that. I thought you were. I thought I was going to say Subway, but
Subway was the next job. I was a sandwich artist after that.
Okay.
Yeah, both these jobs were in high school. Mopping floors and tearing down a salad bar, and it's good. It's good for you. It's good. It's good for you. I'm convinced.
I think that it provides like a level of grit for kids, right? Like you get a taste of the unpleasant jobs that are out there. To then maybe realize that that's not something that you're going to want to do, and you only go through those kind of tribulations through experience.
I will say, as a busboy, I got tipped out by the waiters and waitresses.
Okay,
and I thought I was rich.
Yeah,
because they tipped me out like $20 in a night, and I was like, "Yes, this is so much money." Well, and maybe 30 years ago it was money. But I also at one point the manager came and handed me a mop and said, "Go clean up the men's room." And I won't get into the details, but it took a while.
Oh, wait. The question then is, are you expecting, or would you let your kids do the same thing?
I don't know. I ended up having to leave because I had to leave Marie Callender's because I was closing the restaurant. So I was getting out of there really, really late. And my folks were like, no, you don't need to come home at midnight on a Tuesday because you're closing the salad bar at Marie Callender's. So I don't know, but yeah, I think they can work. I think more importantly, they can work in college. I think kids that work in college are forced to be able to manage money and manage time and manage responsibility more than kids that are just going to school. And there are times and places like your first year of law school, at least for me, where you like school is your job and you're into it. But as a freshman or sophomore in college, junior in college, you can work and go to school. It doesn't need to be like an office job necessarily, but you can work at the campus bookstore, or you can work at the library or wherever it is. And so I expect my kids to work. But
yeah. College definitely seems more reasonable. I just think these days, I'm curious to how many kids in high school are working in comparison to,
I don't know. That's a difficult thing, also because a lot of the entry level jobs have been taken by adults, where a lot of kids worked in fast food, right? And that's not happening anymore. And it's because adults are working in fast food and supporting their families with that. That was part of the reasoning for increasing the minimum wage for fast food workers. So a lot of things. It's not just that kids have gotten lazy and don't work anymore. It's my buddy had a job going and putting leaflets on people's doors, but now you get spam email instead, right? So some things have changed. I don't know. I don't know if there is an expectation of high school kids to work if they want to work. I don't know. I'll let you know when Henry's in his teen years, or you let me know when Carter and Owen are getting there.
Yeah. All right. We got a little bit of time for that still.
Yeah, we both have time. In the meantime, let's solve all of our other economic problems here in the next 15 minutes. You ready to dig in?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, let's dig in. All right, welcome back to the Financial Insights Casual Friday Financial Insights podcast. One of these days, I'm going to get with the new name. It's only taking about a year. I'm Brian Ullman. I'm a financial advisor here at Ford Financial Group, joined by Ryan Louie, also an advisor here with Ford Financial Group. A lot of times what we do is spend our time here answering questions that we get during the week or during the prior 2 weeks. And today is no different, talking about some geopolitical events that have been going on. We won't get too deeply. We're not going to go too deep into the events themselves or the ethics of what's happening around the world, but more about markets' reaction to them. If you have questions, well, first, I would urge you, if you're listening to this on your audio podcast, Spotify, Apple, and the rest, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can catch all of the episodes that usually come out Friday mornings. While you were sleeping Friday morning. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, and you can subscribe to this on YouTube and it'll pop up when you're watching YouTube. So one last thing, as we go through this, if you have questions, I don't know if the comment section is necessarily open in YouTube. It certainly doesn't work that way in the audio podcast. Email us, info@fordfg.com. If you're a client here, we'll forward your question on to your advisor. If you're not a client here, we can get back to you and maybe have a chat and talk with you, not just about your question, but maybe about what's going on, give you a second opinion on your portfolio, perhaps. So, okay, all that stuff's out of the way. Latest development, Ryan, the world is burning again. We know that we have actual, shots fired in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. Obviously, what's going on in the Gaza Strip is troubling. Russia is still battling Ukraine. I even got a question not too long ago about the effects of the earthquake in Taiwan.
Oh, okay.
If you blinked, you missed it.
Yes.
Are you getting those same questions?
Not on Japan, but definitely I think top of people's minds when the media is going, and whenever you hear the word war, or that's what it's kind of seeming like. Sure. It could at least go to something much more substantial. It gets concerning. I do think that again we always think that every single little piece of information, especially those negative pieces of information, are going to have this major ramification in the markets. And so, especially too, sometimes we go quiet, right? We go quiet for a period of time. And so people almost get lulled to sleep. And then you have this one big event happen, and we think it's going to turn into something bigger than it is. I mean, it's hard to, I can't say where this is going. It could turn into something bigger, but for what it turned out to be like last week, probably more of a, it wasn't as big of a concern to the market as we may have initially thought.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I say all the time, you have to ask yourself what concerns you as a citizen of your city, state, country, or as a citizen of the world, and what concerns you as an investor, because those two things aren't always the same. If something concerns you as an investor, you're an investor in, let's say, a shoe company, a global shoe company that I won't name. You're worried about what's going on going to impact their global shoe sales. And oftentimes when you're reading the headline, the answer is going to be no. Or if a global coffee company is going to sell fewer cups of coffee because of what's going on internationally. And so you have events like, well, this last one was an earthquake in Taiwan. And so I guess that was a semiconductor question. But I always think about the earthquake in Japan, followed by the tsunami and nuclear meltdown. And the market puked for about 2 weeks and then almost immediately snapped right back to where it was before because it was just some temporary uncertainty. Now, there are major events, like on here, you can see the last one listed is 9/11, that can change the world order and have lasting effects, of course. But oftentimes, it has a short-term impact, but not a lasting one.
Yeah. I usually tell people and this is me generalizing with clients, but if we're using like the 80-20 rule, I tell people, let's split things into like two buckets. The 80%, the bucket of 80% of what I care about, what the markets really care about, it's going to be what the economy is doing. Right. And then the 20% is everything else. And a lot of the times those things that fall into the everything else bucket, tend to, move the market maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks is long. It's actually probably getting a little bit long. And then the market starts to move elsewhere and pay attention to other things.
And it's even less now. Don't you think it's speeding up? It's getting faster.
That's what I'm saying. 3 weeks to me is long, 1 to 2 weeks is probably pretty normal before the market starts to move on from these other things that are not really related to the economy. This is a great illustration, at least to, give people a perspective of events and what the markets did afterwards. But most people will say, okay, let's look at those two really bad events on the bottom. And you look at 9/11 and while that was horrific, from a market perspective, the market actually bounced back pretty quick initially. And then, as you went further out into the future, you got into a recession.
Right. So
and so it's not really, the two aren't really tied together. This is just projecting like over a year, basically a year, what did the markets do after the initial event? But, things change after the initial event and then you start running into other problems.
Yeah. So we have 7 events on here, just as examples. And, the one before COVID that everybody forgets is the drone strike on the Iranian general that the U.S. did right before COVID.
Right.
And that caused some disruption in the markets and a lot of World War III jokes. But you're absolutely right. They're all on the list where if the beginning event is day zero, all of these events, the Iran drone strike against Saudi Arabia, North Korean missile crisis, Russian annexation of Crimea, first Libyan civil war, so on. 1 year later, positive, not just positive, but positive in the double digits. The only two is Russia invading Ukraine. You could argue that came at the same time interest rates were starting to get cranked up by the Federal Reserve. I would argue that was more influential. And you're absolutely right. 9/11 obviously is 1 year later was down 17%, and 9/11 was certainly world altering. But also what was going on is we had a tech bubble popping. It was the beginning of the 2000s. Enron accounting scandal. I mean, there was a whole lot of stuff that caused S&P 500 to be negative 3 years in a row.
Well, I think one of the other things to, you could look at, maybe around day 50 after these events, almost all of them were either about break even or up. Right?
Absolutely.
And so if you look at it very more closer to the date, these didn't move the markets a ton once you move out a little further, but not, again, once you move out a full year, there's so much more stuff that has been happening in that year other than that event alone.
Absolutely.
But the day 50 mark does give you kind of an idea that, the stories kind of died down a little bit after time settles.
Yeah, even with 9/11, 3 months after 9/11, market was up 4%, 6 months, it was up 7%. So I think that's a pretty astute observation. And so with that, we get volatility, right? And I think the volatility isn't just because of what's going on internationally. We're getting some creeping up of inflation, or inflation not going down. This is core inflation of cost of goods and services, kind of causing markets to rethink the number of rate cuts coming from the Federal Reserve, don't you think?
Yeah, this was, when we were dealing with, inflation over the last 18 plus months now. There were many that were, as the inflation was coming down, they said that, words that were used were sticky, right? Like inflation can be sticky. And while it was coming down initially early on, there was a lot of thought that eventually we would hit a point where it wasn't going to be a straight line downwards anymore. And I think that we definitively have hit that point. Obviously, we're hoping for things to start to come back down again instead of being on this upwards trajectory that we're on right now.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so the the volatility is kind of coming from a lot of different places. You can see, through last Friday, S&P 500 is up 5% on the year, but has had a 5% pullback from its peak on the year. And this is probably the first of many. S&P went up November, December, January, February, March. You don't go up for 5 months in a row and don't have some sort of pullback, right? And the average, this is a chart showing the number of 5% S&P 500 pullbacks each year. We've had one so far this year. We had three last year, and the average is about, you can't have a half a pullback, I suppose, but somewhere between 4 and 5 a year. So perhaps this is the first of a few of these, right?
I mean, it just, we also had, as you mentioned, we had a strong run up. I think you could argue after having 5 months going up as strong as it was, you become almost due for that pullback. We've talked about how when markets run one direction, you're inevitably going to have it go back the other way. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of that. I don't know that really. Inflation still does become the concern because of, again, interest rates and how the impact of that happens. But again, I think sometimes the market just needs something to go back and say, whether that you want to say that's because of what's happening in the Middle East, oil prices, inflation, interest rates, like it just maybe just needed to slow down for a little bit.
Sure. Interesting. You mentioned the Middle East and we're talking about inflation. Oil prices really haven't totally shot up. In fact, kind of seemingly not worried about what's going on in the Middle East, understanding that, there's I won't say bluffing because they're shooting missiles at one another, but there's some posturing, and I don't think a desire for an all-out war between those two countries, especially right now. You can see where the inflation is really coming from other areas because the energy is far from the bottom as in terms of ingredients that's making up the year-over-year changes in the consumer price index.
Yeah, not too impactful overall. Again, as you can see from the left side of the chart, the transportation services has been like the big component. It's the one that's kind of hit the headline news as well. I think a lot of people have seen that, like insurance prices for cars, which would fall into this category, have risen pretty steeply. That's putting it light. Insurance prices over year are up 20+%, 22%, and so it's come as a bit of a sticker shock, I think, for a lot of people as people have started to see their car insurance prices and even the homeownership prices too, as well. But this one particular, the car insurance prices have gone up a lot in the last year.
Yeah, and pretty clearly, transportation services is peaking right now. If the diamond is peak, food has peaked higher and is now actually at its 12-month trough. If you look right in the middle, medical care at its trough, core CPI and CPI are pretty close to its trough, right? So there's just one essentially that's peaking at the moment. And that's transportation services. So it'll be, maybe inflation's coming down.
Yeah, well, I will say this. I can't imagine, knock on wood, that car insurance prices are going to continue to go up at the rate that they've gone up. I think that there's this kind of lag effect that happens in insurance where I think that they're catching up for some of the higher prices of cars that have happened during COVID. Accidents are up. There's some things that are happening. The natural disasters.
Yeah, some cars are harder to fix. Electric cars, for example, aren't just like an easy fix.
Well, I mean, if you think about like cars today, the components are just more difficult. You know, back in the day, you get in a fender bender and you take the bumper off and put a new one on, paint it, and you're good. Now you have a camera inside of it and sensors inside of it, and so
100%.
it's not cheap to just replace a bumper.
Right.
And that goes inside of, you know, why car insurance prices have risen.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's interesting to see this. I think we're all waiting for at some point the beatings to stop as far as inflation is concerned. Even though food's under control, it all still feels more expensive than 5 years ago, which is probably why everybody still feels crummy about what's going on here. I don't know. We'll see. We have a jobs report in a week, 2 weeks, another CPI report. We're going to get another data set in May, along with the Fed meeting. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. All right, let's wrap this up. What's on your mind these days?
So we've been change of pace on some of our weekends. Now I've mentioned my wife runs a lot, but she was kind of told to not always just run. She should kind of take it easy, but still stay active. So we've been looking to like do more hiking and kind of take advantage of the area.
Oh, yeah.
And so like during spring break, she took the kids. I was working, but during spring break, she took the kids to Pincushion. And then a few days later, we did like the big tabletop mountain like hike as a family.
How'd your kids hold up?
They did fine. They've done pretty fine. Like it's been good. And here's part of the reason for me. Like my wife, it's good family time. But we usually take a summer vacation, which requires a lot of walking anyways. And so I do think it helps us that they can do a long hike. They physically can do it, but be like mentally too. It helps them to know, hey, this is no more difficult than a hike that we've done.
Yeah.
I do think there's going to be points in the future where we go places where it's actually are just hiking. Like the vacation is a bit of hiking, as opposed to, you know, a lot of city walking. But I think that, you know, if we continue to do this, it'll help them. We did go
like Machu Picchu is in your future.
It is. I mean, it's on my list, but like, you know, I think that's probably 5-6 years away when the boys are much more capable of doing something like that. I mean, we even went 2 weekends ago. We went mountain bike riding just over at Tesoro Viejo, just like that area. We had a friend that kind of him and his wife took us out there with the boys. They were a little grumpier on that one. It's just because you hit that uphill, and if you can't make it up and you're walking up that bike, they just after a while weren't too happy with it. But it's one of those things I think if we keep doing, they get the stamina and they get the you know, there's a little bit of technique in there in terms of like changing gears that they can get used to, and I think they would enjoy it because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours of being out there.
Something different than just
so I'm like continuing to try to have to like find places. I don't love to have to drive too far where you're driving more than you're actually hiking. And so, you know, it's a matter of finding some places like close enough that we can, all do in like a half a day.
If you're willing to head up to Shaver or Huntington, you know, there's some killer places that you get up on the top of a peak and you can see everything, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. For me this week, I have been focused on sleep. And not so much just like getting my beauty sleep, but actually measuring my sleep.
Okay.
Measuring, you know, I'm wearing trackers and stuff, measuring my respiratory rate.
Are you using just a watch or are you using another device as well?
I'm just using the watch, but then other apps that use the data from the watch.
Okay.
Just to see like, you know, REM sleep, deep sleep, what percentage. It turns out I'm sleeping really well, but I'm making more of a point. I get good sleep. I just need more sleep. And so
when do you go to sleep and when do you wake up?
I've been making it a point to crash like 10:30, go to sleep at 10:30, and up at 5:45.
Okay.
And so, but I want to get up earlier, which means it's got to you got to move your time. You got to move the time.
This
is where it becomes on my mind. Instead of just kind of like finding my way to bed at 10:30, it's about like phone down, reading earlier, so it's I'm sleeping at 10:30, not getting up to brush my teeth and let the dog out and do all of that stuff.
So I have a recommendation. I went through like that whole, I had the ring for, this is probably five plus years ago, trying to measure my sleep. And then I would, because at that point had really bad sleep. I will say, like, more recently, the last 6, maybe 12 months, my sleep length is like pretty darn long. Like I get a probably solid 8 hours. And so I don't worry about during those times. But to give you a recommendation, you should find some podcasts with Matthew Walker. He's like the sleep guy. He's a professor at Berkeley. And so he goes into, like, of course, a lot on these podcasts, all the details of things that you got to think about, right? Things not to eat, when to exercise, not to exercise, magnesium, if that's something that, you could take as a supplement. There's all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But there's always like these nuggets that you'll get from there, because you're like, oh, I do that. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that.
Totally.
And then as you measure, you actually get a feeling for, like, is the change that I'm doing actually working? That's the nice thing about being able to measure it.
Yeah. I thought about the genesis of this is actually thinking about getting a Whoop band. And then I'm not a CrossFit athlete. Like, I'm not doing this stuff, but in just kind of looking at it, there were a couple apps where people were like, I just use my Apple Watch in this app and it's just as good. And in fact, it may even be more useful. And so that's when I started wearing the watch and measuring my sleep and doing that stuff. But you're absolutely right. I find if I play tennis late, I'm all revved up and I can't crash easily early because I was playing tennis until 9:30. So I can't crash at 10:15, I don't know.
Back in the day,
I'm very early stage. People listening to this might be like, yeah, obviously. But I'm not like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I had the Oura ring, it would actually give you like a grade every morning. And so, like, you check your grade, and like, I knew I had a bad sleep, and then you get this, you look at your grade, and it tells you what you knew. I think that's actually why I stopped wearing it, was just because after months of doing this, I was like, this is kind of, I don't need it to tell me that I got a bad grade. I kind of knew at that time that that was happening, and it was just reinforcing it. And so
that was pretty much the sentiment with the Whoop band as well. It's like, I wake up and I feel crummy. I slept badly. Oh, what do you know? This is confirming how I feel,
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll find something like it. It's fun to research, though, for sure.
Yeah. This is me just dabbling, but that's what's on my mind this week, is measuring my sleep and trying to, well, of course, as competitive as I can be sometimes, trying to beat it. So, I got, this 30% deep sleep. I'm going to try and get 32 somehow. I don't know. Go to sleep earlier, wake up earlier. I don't know. So stay tuned. We'll see if I can stick with it. All right, Ryan. Well, let's leave it there. I imagine inflation's still going to be with us next week and in the next 2 weeks. But God knows whatever else is going to show up on the scene. I will say, though, we are 1 week out from having the mayor join us for our client event. So if you have gotten this far into the podcast and you're still listening, that means you are one of our best clients and you're probably showing up. But if you aren't, email us at info@fordfg.com. We'll make sure that we reserve one of the last remaining spaces for you. And you can come. We talk about, everybody's worried about, like I said, things going on around the world. We thought that it'd be helpful if we focused on things going on in our own backyard. Crime, potholes getting filled, streetlights being on, because those are really the political issues that actually affect us day by day. So we'll refocus the conversation in a week with the mayor. So, Ryan, until the next one.
All right. See you next time.
All right.